I've drafted over 2,000 fantasy football teams this year. Best Ball, Underdog, DraftKings, Fast Draft, Drafters, which is the sponsor of our video, by the way. Use code Davis to deposit over there on Drafters. FFPC, NFFC, name a format, I've drafted in it. And these are the 4 lessons that I've learned this year in fantasy football. The first, wide receiver is not deep. Second, NFL RB2s are almost always overpriced in fantasy. 3, tight end is never actually deep, but probably the most important, there are really only a few players that matter in fantasy football every single year, and if you don't get those guys, it's going to be very hard to win. Let's begin with the idea that wide receiver is not deep. And frankly, I think that this is sort of a new phenomenon because most NFL teams use 11 personnel instead of 12 personnel, and we know the names of a lot of wide receiver 3s. We can always tell ourselves going into a draft, hey man, I'm going to go draft Jalen Coker. I'm going to go draft Jalen McMillan. I'm going to go draft Troy Franklin, and I'll kind of be able to get some points from there. But that really is not true. Top 6 wide receivers in fantasy over the last 2 years have averaged 248 fantasy points. The wide receiver 24, that drops below 190 fantasy points. When you start to dip below that, you start to see less than 10 points per game. You literally will get to like the wide receiver 40 and see guys who are scoring 140, 150 points. They are scoring less than half of what the high-end wide receivers. For me, this year, I'm drawing that line at Brian Thomas Jr. as the wide receiver 8. Do I think Drake London can have a good year? Do I think A.J. Brown can have a good year? Of course I do. Do I think that you can take running backs in the first round and still win your league? I mean, I think that is obviously true, but there really is no substitution for what CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, what these guys can do for your fantasy teams, and we just don't have to lie. We can be real about it. You can understand that when you pass on one of those mega elite wide receivers, you're probably not catching up unless you find this year's Puka Nacua. Second, we have to talk about that tier of running backs that we all kind of like, but we know are overpriced. I think the key guy for me this year to represent that is going to be Zach Charbonnet. We know that Charbonnet is very good when Kenneth Walker is out. But guess what? Kenneth Walker is not out. The season is about to start. Kenneth Walker is going to be starting. Paying absolute top tier for running back 2s, this is according to a lot of Hayden Winks' research, these are basically the worst picks to make in fantasy football. Compare someone like Tyler Algier, who's the 50th running back off the board, or even like DJ Giddens, who you can get with the final pick of your drafts, or might even be on the waiver wire in some of your leagues. The weekly projection for Zach Charbonnet and DJ Giddens, I mean, I don't have projections pulled up right now, but I'm going to go ahead and guess that it's going to be right about 7.5 points, which is pretty good for the second running back on a team, particularly like a passing down back. But compare that to someone like DJ Giddens, maybe he projects for like 3 points. Guess what? Those 7 points do not matter to your fantasy football team. The only thing that matters is which of these guys is going to end up starting. So the way I've liked to build a lot of my fantasy teams is take a lot of DJ Giddens, take a lot of Kyle Monangai, take a lot of Taj Brooks, these guys who are clear running back 2s, clear handcuffs, but if they get that injury benefit, then they're going to end up being guys that you can start. I think one of the worst things we do in fantasy football every single year is really target the high upside handcuffs, the handcuffs that we know are really good. I think that is sort of what it is. Like what we do is when we have seen a running back 2 play really well in fantasy football before, then we tend to value them more. But I think that is pretty clearly shown in the data to be a mistake. Our third lesson here, tight end is never actually deep. And I fall for this one all the time. This is something that I am Charlie in the football when it comes to this situation. Every single year, I kind of like Jake Ferguson. Dallas Goedert is steady and dependable. You can wait in your draft and take David Njoku. I mean, I've made videos on this channel about how David Njoku is this awesome fantasy football option, and he is. Don't get me wrong. You should draft David Njoku, but tight end is never, ever deep. It's never the way it works. The ADP correlation to final points in 2024 was 0.27. That is a pretty low correlation. It's been lower than that in prior years. Mid-round tight ends rarely separate. Projections at the position miss badly, and volatility almost always rules at that position. What is the actionable takeaway here? Well, I think it's to look at guys like Sam Laporta as the tight end 4, TJ Hawkinson, even my guy, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, these guys. And I think we can look at that situation and say, these guys are being overvalued because we know what we're going to get. We know that they are going to have consistent, steady roles inside of their offense. A lot of Dwayne McFarland's research has been really good on this in terms of identifying breakout tight ends. It's basically two things we want to look at. Can a tight end conceivably be number 2 on their team in targets? And is a tight end going to run 75% or more of their team's routes? I'm looking at guys like Jatavian Sanders as a potential breakout. I'm looking at Theo Johnson. I'm looking at Juwan Johnson. These guys in a weekly range are going to score super similarly to Dallas Goedert, Jake Ferguson. I mean, Kyle Pitts, I still don't actually really understand why any of us are drafting Kyle Pitts. I guess that, we all kind of just lost our minds there. But the general takeaway here would be pay up for Bowers, pay up for McBride, pay up for Kittle, or let the position go, because this is a position that more than anything is just dictated by touchdowns. Tight ends are, generally speaking, unless you are Brock Bowers or Rob Gronkowski, not the straw that stirs the drink inside of the offense. We need that touchdown deodorant at the position, and we don't want to have to pay for it. Our final lesson here, this is number 1. This, if you take nothing away from ever watching a YouTube video that I'm in, this is the answer. Every year, and this is true of every year you've played fantasy football, every year I've played fantasy football, only a few league-winning players matter. Most players in fantasy football at quarterback, at running back, at wide receiver, at tight end are going to score in a nice, tight banded range in a given week and over a season. Go look at the 2023-2022 wide receiver scoring results, and you're going to see a load of dudes who in PPR scored between 10 and 13 points per game. You're going to see a very small number of spikes. 2024 was actually awesome evidence of this. If we take numbers from Best Ball, we'll see that Jamar Chase, Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, and Derrick Henry set all-time records in terms of advancement rate, right? These were 4 of the 5 highest advance rate players in Best Ball of all time. You extrapolate that over to a league format, and you're going to see the exact same thing. If you drafted Jamar Chase, Saquon Barkley, and Derrick Henry, you basically won your league in the regular season. Now, in the playoffs, I think we all know anything can happen in 1 week of fantasy football. Your buddy picked up the right guy. Let's go all the way back to a Frisman Jackson type situation. Your buddy can beat you with the worst team imaginable if you guys just happen to both be there in the final. But I think this is something that we need to be a little bit more cognizant of. My friend Scott Barrett does a great example of this. His Power Law article over on Fantasy Points is awesome. But these quote-unquote Power Law players are the guys who dictate who wins money in fantasy football and who loses money in fantasy football. If you do not have one of the guys who defined the season on your fantasy football team, then you're probably just not going to win. And is there a lesson here? I suppose the lesson is more in how we think about the game, where we look back on things and we go, oh, this guy crushed his draft position. Drafted him as the wide receiver 37 and he finishes the wide receiver 24, so surely he was a good pick for my fantasy team. And he wasn't a bad pick for your fantasy team in terms of the guys who just straight up bust, guys who get benched, guys who get injured. But at the end of the day, taking that guy who beats his average draft position by, 20 spots still probably didn't really matter to your fantasy football team. And I think it's really helpful to realize that this is a really volatile game that is defined by things that are unknown before the season starts. So to recap, wide receiver dries up quickly, expensive running back 2s are traps, tight end being deep is a myth, and the league winners decide everything. It only takes 1 or 2 of those guys to change your season, and I think that you should draft like you were hunting them. Make sure to like the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and please check out our sponsor over on Drafters. You can use code Davis to get a first-time deposit bonus up to $100 over there. You can go draft in their main event. Right now, looks like there's going to be some significant overlay, and I will see you guys back tomorrow.